Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is our 50th anniversary year, and it is a pleasure this evening to welcome to the IISS an historically important personality who, as I shall describe in a moment, has been kind enough to lend his name to a fundraising effort to honor his achievements in this conference room of the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Kuan Yew is Asia's leading strategic thinker, but is so having been the founder and then leader of a very special city-state. To understand his personal story best, it's probably necessary to read his autobiography, From Third World to First. But to understand his place in history, it's worth perhaps listening to the words of Henry Kissinger, who wrote a preface for that special book. Henry Kissinger said, "In the case of Kuan Yew, the father of Singapore's emergence as a national state, the ancient argument, whether circumstance or personality shapes events, is settled in favor of the latter. Every great achievement is a dream before it becomes a reality, and his vision was of a state that would not simply survive, but prevail by excelling. Superior intelligence, discipline, and ingenuity would substitute for resources. We at the ISS sympathize and draw inspiration from those who, with basic resources but superior ingenuity, try to punch successfully above their weight in international affairs. At this year's 50th anniversary dinner at the Guildhall, I noted that every worthy enterprise begins with a conceit. Some years ago, we at the ISS wanted to do something more than comment on Asian regional security, and instead to do something direct to assist multilateral defense diplomacy. It was logical that we join forces with Singapore to create the Shangri-La Dialogue that has become the only trans-regional institution to manage and bear witness to Asian defense diplomacy. Ministers of defense from some 25 countries feel they must meet in Singapore to build confidence and develop that transparency that can help to build security in the Asia-Pacific. The ISS now has an office in Singapore, and as of this year, we will be developing substantially more research on issues directly of interest to the governments who we convene at the Shangri-La Dialogue. None of that would have been possible without the support and the personal encouragement given to me and to the ISS as a whole by Kuan Yew. We were delighted that he accepted that this conference room, where so many strategic thinkers, heads of government, foreign and defense ministers, and other opinion makers regularly speak in London, could be named after him. We are very grateful to the following organizations who gave generous financial support to the ISS to make this possible: Hotel Property Limited and Reef Holdings, the Sino Group, Singapore Technologies Engineering, Keppel Corporation, the estate of Tan Sri Koo Tek Puat, Singapore Press Holdings Foundation, Semcorp Industries, and DBS Bank. To open this Kuan Yew conference room, the Minister Mentor of Singapore has agreed to a special talk and to a conversation with our guests. Many of us have benefited from his reflections on the world scene and on the rise in different paths of development of great powers. His strategic thinking is of the classic kind, generous in sweep, focused on the important, and mindful of the distinction between the trend and the merely trendy. And so as I turn to our chairman, Francois Aisbourg, to begin the proceedings, please welcome the Minister Mentor of Singapore to London, to the ISS, and to his room.
Well, sir, I think the applause says it all. I'm not going to repeat John Chipman's words concerning you. I think they're all entirely deserved. But before launching the discussion this evening, I really would want to express my own appreciation of the Institute as a whole, because you represent something which is altogether rare in this world, the value of wisdom. A lot has changed in this world, and a lot of that change you have helped to happen in your own part of the world in ways which have been constructive and beneficial. And when we see, as the world appears to be walking towards something which looks a little bit too much like financial meltdown, it's good to know that there are rocks, serious people in this world who can show us the way. And sir, it is really to your wisdom which I would like to point. Now, to get the discussion going, I would like to ask you, if I may, how do you see Asia's role in international security developing, given changes within the region, given the rapidly growing impact on everything that the Asian countries do on the international environment? How do you see that role going on, and how should the rest of the world respond?
Well, let me start by saying how I see the world. How does Singapore survive and prosper? Only if there's international order, there's peace and stability in the region, and there's growth instead of wars and conflicts. Why has the region grown in the last 50 years? Because there was an American umbrella that provided that security, that enabled countries to live peacefully together. Then first Japan, then Korea, then Taiwan, then Hong Kong, then Singapore blossomed. That spilled over to the other countries. Finally, Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon went to China and opened the door. Then Deng Xiaoping came to Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur and Singapore in November 1978 to get us to join forces to stand up against the Vietnamese when they're about to capture Cambodia. I think he had a shock because he saw 3 third world cities better than Shanghai and probably better than Beijing, not at such a grand scale, but no dilapidated buildings. And what intrigued him about Singapore was that it was orderly, it was clean, everybody had a home. And what was the economy run on? Trade and multinationals. So that intrigued him. He asked many questions. And he realized that you can make use of international capitalism, train your people, get revenue, and bring about an egalitarian result. I think when the aircraft doors closed as I sent him off, I told my colleagues sending him off at the airport, in those days we still sent people off at the airport because they were far and few between such visitors. I said the staff must have got a shellacking because the brief they gave him did not live up to his experience, because instead of crowds applauding and waving at him, everybody went about their business. The greatest Chinese leader next to Mao, and everybody said, well, life goes on. He then decided that same year, that was November, that December, he decided on the open door policy. And he started with the coastal cities, about 10 of them, and at the same time privatize or set out lands from the communes to farmers. He must have been thinking this for a long time, that the system was malfunctioning. And what he saw in Singapore clicked. Then their good fortune was they had George W.H. Bush, who invited them to export to America, finally they're now in WTO. I think they did their sums carefully. Why did these countries develop? How did they overtake China? So you must have studied Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, three. In Singapore's case, more or less a Chinese city, 75% Chinese. What is it that enabled them to grow and they did grow? And I believe they came to the right conclusion. Knowledge of the outside world, connections with the outside world, trade, investments, technology, and markets. What is it they need? The same. So slowly, gradually, they moved, and Chu Rongqi pushed them into WTO. He also came to Singapore, studied us in the 90s, went back and started his own housing scheme in Shanghai based on our model. So if I look forward, I said, what kind of world will allow us to prosper? I think I require first an American pillar with an EU support with it that provides the overall ballast. Then as China grows, and India grows, Brazil, and the Russians become more muscular, gradually adjustments take place. So if China continues on its present course, which I think they will for this generation, because this generation has learned enough about how nearly they came to grief, Great Leap Forward, crash with them, Russians across the Yalu River, problems with the Vietnam War, and rescued by the Americans, wanting a way out of the Vietnam War. They're not going to miss this chance. So if you watch them, you will see that they avoid conflict. You're not going to change them, but they're not going to be truculent like the Russians. If you complain about Darfur, then they send an emissary and try and improve things. You complain about this, they try to ameliorate you. But their relentless pursuit of commodities and energy will go on, because they know that if that stops, then trouble at home. So if they continue this course, they'll be a player within the system. And I believe that will hold until a generation that has no experience of the past comes into its own and say, we have arrived. Then you might have a different China. So I put this question, I put this point to them. They said, no, we're going to make quite sure that doesn't happen. We need 40, 50 years, because they know they need to educate their people, as we have educated our people. So they got their students all over the world. I understand you have about 75,000 of them in your universities. Never has, this is China's Meiji Revolution 150 years after the Japanese. Learn from the world. Come back. Many won't, doesn't matter. They'll network, bring back knowledge, technology, and links with those countries. India, I think, have also decided they had to open up. I wasn't convinced at the beginning, because when Manmohan Singh as finance minister and Chidambaram as commerce minister came in the early 90s, just after the IMF pressured them to open up, because funds were running out, no reserves. They asked us if we would back them in lend our credibility in the free market enterprise. So we said yes. But when I visited them, I found the BJP, both Advani, and the name slips with me, the chairman, the man who was prime minister now. They told me that India was selling as heirlooms. So I said that'd be a U-turn. But the Prime Minister visited China after he took office. When he came back, the next time I saw him, it was full steam ahead. So they realized that if they didn't go this way, they'd be left behind. So if India and China keeps on this course, then we're going to have another 10, 20, 30, 40 years of peace and stability in Asia, and we will grow. But things could go wrong, so I said to myself, what is the worst case scenario? China gives up because world crisis turns protectionist. They got to go their own way. And they don't make this kind of growth, and they have internal problems. Then what? Then I cannot say that there will be peace and stability. Then they have, at the moment that their approach is, let's not disturb the world order. They did a television series year before last, towards the end of the year, 13 of them. I watched them, and I said, screen it with English subtitles. It was an interesting analysis of history, and they call it the rise of the great powers. Don't know if you've seen it. It started off with Portugal, Spain, Holland, Britain, France. Maritime powers captured the world. What enabled them to do it? Technology. A united country going abroad with naval technology and increased capabilities. Why did they come to grief when they came to Japan and Germany? Because they challenged the international order, and they were not big enough to do that, and they both came to grief. So, lesson is, don't be stupid. I do not see them challenging the international order. I'll play within the rules. I'm not seeking spheres of influence. I'll trade, I'll barter, I'll do whatever is necessary within the rules. In 50 years, when I'm there and I've got an educated population, my R&D is catching up, well, that's for them to decide. But as I said, the other case scenario, something goes wrong, then there are difficulties. They also they try to create an East Asia bloc that leads to regional rivalries. I think then you have an unstable world. So I view this European Union lack of unanimity in responding to the Russians as a weakening of the system. Once Schroeder wanted this Gerhard Schroeder wanted the pipeline and get an advantage. I met him after he left office. We knew each other at some meeting. He said, Russia is more important to us than China or any other part of the world. They need us, we need them, and Eastern Europe is our sphere. Angela Merkel is not a Russian fan, but she has adopted this pipeline. And this gives the Russians, Putin and Medvedev, a very powerful instrument to split the European Union. another pipeline to Italy and all the countries in between. So whether it is Abkhazia or Ossetia, there will not be a united response, which means a weakened Western position. You watch the Chinese, they have not recognized Kosovo. They had a meeting in Bishkek with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They expressed profound concern, but no recognition. So the other Central Asian states also withheld recognition. We are going to take a non-combative position. So I think for the time being, all is well, but if this meltdown takes place and leads to a different kind of world, then I cannot see. The world will stay like this as long as the Chinese believe this is the way they will modernize and catch up.
Minister Mentor, you painted a picture of, in effect, the peaceful rise of China that we all hope for. During the Cold War in Europe, there was an unfortunate phrase that was sometimes used about the powers that be in Helsinki. People talked about Finlandization, and by that they meant adoption of a policy of a country that wasn't part of a former Western alliance system, where they were solicitous, careful of their relations with the Soviet Union in order to ensure that by that diplomacy they wouldn't be overrun. But it did mean that they would adopt a public profile that to some in the West seemed too caring of the then Soviet perspective in international affairs. Is there any risk that the countries of Southeast Asia, knowing that China would not wish to exert its power directly or use military force, but understanding the nature and weight of Chinese power, could anticipate Chinese demands before they are even expressed with force and begin bending to a Chinese will that doesn't have to be used so much? And
that's already happening. I mean, anything discussed within the 10 members of ASEAN, you can be sure the embassies will be, Chinese embassies in 3 countries will be informed: Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia. And they know exactly the position of each of the 10 members. What is it you want? Facilities for a summit in Laos, in Vientiane, for an ASEAN summit. I build you a conference hall. I build you a hotel. I provide you with the facilities. And the way they exercise soft power goes back to a very traditional Chinese way. 1.5 years ago, they decided to hold a meeting of ASEAN leaders in Nanning, which is in Guangxi province, a very backward province. And they demonstrated that they had changed Guangxi. The place was splendidly decked out. And then they put on a show in which, in every show, they depicted the culture and the dances and the songs of each of the ASEAN countries. And I wasn't there, but I spoke to the ministers who were there. I said, one leader of a big ASEAN country says, now we know it's not democracy that makes you grow, it's stability and order. But whether he can establish stability and order and at the same time cohesion in policies and drive in executing those policies, that's another matter. But they went back fully conscious that this is an unstoppable rise. I mean, look at the time within which it was done. And the Beijing Olympics has the same effect. It's not that they have arrived, but they are showing you their potential. They are not a new power, they're an old power that's reviving. And only they can stop themselves. They have the manpower, they have the more than adequate intellectual capabilities. They sent up the man to into space all on their own. I mean, with the bomb, you can say that one eminent Chinese scientist came back from America and helped them, but this one, nobody helped them. And I watched their program on CCTV4, which was a Chinese program. And they explained how they arrived at just one astronaut. They started with 1,500 candidates for about 3 or 4 years. And 3 months before the end, they reduced it to 50 candidates. Then the final 3 weeks, they reduced it to 5 candidates. Then the last day, they reduced it to the 1, and Hu Jintao flew in and wished him Godspeed. And off he went. And he knew exactly what to do. He spoke to his family. And of course, this was all post facto after it's in space, not as it was taking off. But I thought to myself, 1,500 to choose one. What will happen to the Olympics? They're now taking up cricket. No, you may not believe it, but they are. Because there's a World Cup. It's a way of exercising sport, which shows that you're just like other human beings and quite skillful at the game. And they've got Australian and Indian trainers to produce a cricket 11. And why not? You don't have to body bulk to play football or rugby. So I see all the signs of a power already on the ascendant without having to use physical force. I mean, you take Singapore. We've helped them in so many ways. But when our Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, visited Taiwan, and there was a lot of publicity which the Taiwanese foolishly thought would help them. They decided to show us that this is wrong. You're helping separatists, because Chen Shui-bian was there. And they froze everything. And a free trade area which was on the cards just got held back until finally now is on the cards and settled, will be signed in October. But after we've learned what not to do when their core interests are involved. I mean, it's already happened. So therefore, I start off with the major premise. Let's have a world order in which the one I'm accustomed to still obtains.